Are you ready for ski season? Are you getting excited for a snowy white mountain? I am. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love this, and this fall has been so amazing, but it's not going to last. It's going to turn white, and I know me and a lot of other people have been getting excited about getting up on the mountain in the snow. That's coming pretty soon. Right now, they're doing a lot of construction work behind me, to the side of me. A lot of construction going on here at the ski area. It takes work to build something. It takes time, takes energy, takes resources. I want to come back to that in a minute, what it takes to build something really great. So the other day I was talking to a guy who knew I was a pastor, but he didn't know where, and we were having a conversation, and he says to me, where's your church? What's your church? And I told him it was Heart of Steamboat Methodist Church. He said, is that the one that has all the people together? And what he meant by that was how our congregation has opened our doors to allow our building to also become a home for the Jewish community in Steamboat Springs, the Buddhist community, our Muslim community. And we've invited people in to share that space, to be in our building and to find a home there as well. And so I said to him, that's our church. And he looked me right in the eyes for a minute, and then he says, I love that so much. He says, I love it so much. It was great to hear. And it was really great because he's not a religious person. He's not a part of any of these communities, but he's just drawn to that idea of bringing people together, of gathering people, making relationships. It's such a powerful thing. I think in our culture, to draw people together, to draw diverse people, to make community, that might be a truly miraculous thing in this day and age. And we've been talking about the miracles of Jesus these last couple months. Miracles of Jesus that I break into 5 categories. We talked about raising the dead. We talked about the casting out of evil, the healing of people, the feeding of people. And today is the last piece. I want to talk about these miracles in what I call general supernaturalism, which is kind of all the miracles that kind of don't fit in one of those 4 previous categories. And there's not really a whole lot of them. We see Jesus, he walks on water. Jesus calms storm. There's numerous stories about Jesus calming the storm, and the disciples are in the boat at sea. Jesus seems to know where the fish are. So people like me, if you relate I could use Jesus once in a while when I'm on the river. He seems to know where the fish are. He helps people find them miraculously. Jesus turns water into wine for a wedding celebration. Jesus kills a fig tree, which is an interesting story for another day. And then there's this one last story that's a really kind of strange story about Jesus having a conversation with Peter about the temple tax. And then he ends up saying, I want you to go to the sea. I want you to cast a hook. The first fish you catch will have a coin in its mouth. Take that coin and use that to pay the temple tax. That is a strange story, and one for another day as well. And while all those miracles, that's it. I mean, that's sort of the rest of the miracles that Jesus does in the Gospels. And while all those are great and beautiful stories and lovely things to explore, in our world right now, those probably aren't the things we need. We probably don't really need Jesus to help us find the fish, although I kind of want to hang on to that one. You know what I mean? We don't need him to turn water into wine, although I love that story. We don't need Jesus really to walk on water. What we really need right now, I think most, is for Jesus to help us learn how to love one another, to learn how to build community together, to bring people who are different together. That might be a truly miraculous thing. I mean, how do we create diverse community in a culture, in a world that's constantly wanting to drive us apart, wanting to make divisions, to push people to fight with one another, to see the world in terms of winners and losers, and to drive us into conflict? How do we build a community that brings people together? I was listening to a podcast recently and heard a pastor talk about going to church on a Sunday morning. And following that service, a woman in the congregation who had been there for many, many years, a little bit older woman who had been there for a long time, who he loved and cared about, came up to him and said, "Pastor, I'm leaving the church." She said, I'm conservative. I just don't really feel like I fit here. I feel like maybe I don't belong, and I've decided to leave the church." And it broke that pastor's heart. This woman who he's loved and cared about and been in a relationship with was leaving. And the very next Sunday, he came to church, and after church that very next Sunday, a young couple came up to him and said they were also leaving the church. You know what they said? They said, "We're progressives, and there's conservative people in the church, and we don't really feel like we could be in church with conservative people and people who have different views like that. So we're leaving the church." And that broke his heart too. So what's a pastor to do, right? Like, what's a church to do? I mean, the church ought to be a place that brings people together, but too often churches are maybe sometimes the most divisive places we have. And churches often end up with people who all think the same way, who all have the same views. And I get that on one level because it's comfortable to be with people who think like we do, who act like we do, who vote like we do, whatever it may be. But that's not what Jesus calls us to, right? Jesus calls us to more than that. Jesus calls us to love those who love us, yes, but also to love those who don't love us. Jesus calls us to love those who think like us and those who don't. Jesus calls us to love those who have experiences like we do, and also those who have different experiences. Jesus calls us to do the hard work of finding something deeper than what's easy and comfortable. In the Gospels, there's an amazing story about Jesus and a Roman centurion. Now, a Roman centurion was a Roman soldier in charge of people, and part of their charge was to keep the peace, to dole out punishment. A Roman centurion, in essence, was exactly the kind of person that a poor Jewish religious teacher who was stirring up trouble sometimes would likely fear the most. So you have Jesus and a Roman centurion, the oppressor and the oppressed, people from completely different worlds. And the Roman centurion has a servant who's ill. He wants him to be made whole. He wants him to be healed. So he sends people to talk to Jesus, say to Jesus, can you heal my servant? And these people go to Jesus and they ask him that. And Jesus, in essence, says, yeah, I'll come to him. Where is he? But the servant sends word saying, Jesus, you don't need to come. I'm not really worthy to have you under my roof, but just say the word and he will be healed. Wow. And Jesus heals this man's servant. And then Jesus says something really interesting. He says, I haven't found faith as great as this in all of Israel. What he's saying is, all you people who are my people like me, people I'm with, this outsider has shown the greatest faith of all. A beautiful story about people from different worlds seeing across the divide. This centurion sees something in Jesus and reaches out to him. And Jesus reaches back because he also sees something in this Roman soldier. It's a beautiful story about crossing boundaries and how Jesus makes so much possible. In our church, our mission statement is this: we seek to continue the ministry of Jesus by being filled with the Spirit of Christ, being engaged with our community, and being inclusive of all people. We see Jesus as starting a ministry, starting a way of being here on earth, and our job together is to carry that on, to carry that forward, and we seek to do that in all the ways that we can. I think our community knows that we're building something together. We're building something, not a ski lift like what's going on behind me, but we're building a community that draws people together in the spirit of love and grace and brotherhood and sisterhood. And like any building, it takes time, it takes effort, it takes work, it takes blood, sweat, and tears to make something happen. And we are about that work of bringing people together. So I hope and believe that people in Steamboat Springs know that what goes on in our church at the corner of 8th and Oak Street and beyond, online in different ways, and the people who make that happen are about bringing people together. We're about trying to bring about the miracle that we really need, for Jesus to help us to learn how to love one another and to come together. Now, church and a lot of civic organizations have declined in recent years, and I want to read you a little piece from a book that struck me. It's by Harvard political scientist Robert Putnam, who's wrote about the breakdown of social connection in American culture. He talks about church, and he offers some hopeful words about church. He said in the course of their research, he says, we were shocked to discover that people who are active in religious communities are systematically more generous, better neighbors. They're more likely to work on community projects, more likely to give to secular causes as well as religious causes. They're much more likely to volunteer. They're more likely to give blood. They're more likely to let a stranger cut in front of them in line. And then he says this, but it turns out that virtually none of that seems to have anything to do with the content of people's theology. Putnam's research shows that what determines a religious person's neighborliness is not how deeply a person believes in God or their particular doctrine, but the number and quality of their personal relationships. I find that fascinating. I think one of the things that says to us is that, it's probably not most important exactly the content of our beliefs, but it's how we live with one another. It's how we love each other, which Jesus told us was the greatest commandment. So it should be no surprise that that's ultimately what matters most. And I hope and pray that we can love each other in our church and in our community. That if we keep doing what we're doing, we deepen our way into it, that we can truly do something miraculous to create a place of spiritual welcome for all people, a place of spiritual welcome and connection for rich and poor, Republican and Democrat, gay and straight, black and white, Christian, non-Christian, that people will know that they're welcome together. They're welcome at the heart of Steamboat Church, whether that's for a meal on a snowy evening in the winter or a service on a Sunday morning, whether it's just to sit in a sacred space in silence and reflect, or maybe it's because you're grieving and you need somebody to cry alongside of you. Maybe it's because you can't pay the electric bill and you don't know where to turn, or you feel all alone in school and you just want to make a friend. Perhaps you're one of these folks from one of the other faith communities that use our building, or a part of a nonprofit that's bringing health and wholeness in Steamboat Springs. Whoever you are, wherever you are, I hope you know that you have friends at the heart of Steamboat. We'll turn the light on for you, and we'll leave the light on for you, because we will be cheering you on as you seek to live and grow and spread love in our community. I think that's the miracle we really need, the miracle of loving each other. Imagine if we could do that. That's our job. Grace and peace